Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world we find you today. Welcome to the first of our ProPak series of webinars, which will run over the coming months, covering key trends and the hottest topics in the packaging and processing industries. My name is Marek Szandrowski, and I'm the brand director at Informa Markets with responsibility for the ProPak portfolio of processing and packaging trade shows across China, India, Southeast Asia, and most recently, Egypt. These last weeks should have seen us running our two biggest events. ProPak Asia was set to run in Bangkok last week, and ProPak China in Shanghai this week. However, at this time when massive changes to all our lives and businesses have been brought about by the pandemic, we wanted to find a way in order to stay connected and provide a virtual meeting place for our industry to gather and to engage. We are therefore very delighted and excited to be organising this series of webinars in collaboration with the World Packaging Organisation and supported by the Australian Institute of Packaging. So first of all, I'd like to give a massive thanks to Pierre Pienaar, WPO President, in particular for his enthusiasm in embarking on this project with us and shaping the agenda for the forthcoming series. This will no doubt provide our community with great insights and many observations on the impacts, challenges and opportunities that this situation presents us with currently. Before I ask Pierre to give his presentation, I just wanted to give you a quick update on what is happening with the ProPak shows. So Informa Markets took the decision early on to postpone a number of our events into the fourth quarter of the year. Now the good news is that many of the countries where we run our events have already started and are significantly down the road of unlocking their, easing their lockdowns and have permitted controlled events to be held under strict biosecurity and safety protocols. And we're also now seeing some relaxation in international travel restrictions. So if this scenario continues in its current positive direction, we are very confident of successfully running a number of our flagship ProPak events, starting with ProPak Vietnam, taking place in September between the 9th and the 12th of September in Ho Chi Minh. In the interim, of course, we'll also be offering a number of digital options to our customers to continue with their business development and seeking opportunities to connect with visitors to our shows in the digital arena before getting back to running live events. So just before handing over to Pierre, I would like to ask you to make this as an interactive, as most interactive session as we possibly can. So please feel free to use the Q&A function on Zoom and submit your questions during Pierre's presentation. I'm delighted to announce that we have participants from over 50 countries, so this is a truly international webinar. And so when submitting questions, please put forward your name and the country that you're dialing in from. So without any further ado, I'd now like to hand over to Pierre Pienaar, President of the World Packaging Organisation, for his presentation. Thank you.
Well, a very, very good day to all of you, and certainly from the eastern side of Australia, a very warm welcome to all of you, along with Informa Markets. And I must also add my thank you to Nerida Kelton from the Australian Institute of Packaging for her work that she's done in helping it. Well, I think let me get straight into it. Please ask the questions on, as Marek mentioned, using the buttons on your screen, and I'll answer as many as I can at the end of the presentation. I'm going to be looking at what the challenges and the impacts has been and will be and are regarding COVID-19 on our packaging industry worldwide. For some of you, you may have seen this particular scene before. This is a Great Pacific garbage patch. And all that you see in front of you is rubbish. Much of it is plastic, but there's a lot of other rubbish there as well. And unfortunately, if I show you this screen, you will see that that garbage patch, what we're seeing above the surface of the sea is only like the iceberg. There's a lot below the surface. And if we see in the screen at the bottom, you will notice exactly where that garbage patch sits, which is between California and Hawaii. And we cannot allow this to get any worse. It is now nearly 3 times the size of France. So it's a shocker. And this will, if it gets worse, will have a severe impact globally on sustainability. And I'll come to that in a moment. More than 100 years ago, Mahatma Gandhi said that there's enough on the planet for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. And how true is that today when one looks at this screen? And clearly you can see where we are at the moment. And we are heading for, by 2050, that we will require just short of 3 Earths. We all know there is only one. And so we need to do something about it. And I use that we, the royal we, because it affects every single one of us. And each and every one of us needs to do something about it. We need to be more aware of our surroundings, how we use them, because we need to change that pathway. And if one looks at the bottom right-hand side of that screen, you will see that by 2050, if we change the course and we do what is needed, and that which I will be discussing to some degree in this presentation, by 2050, we can be on the right path. So how do we do that? Sure, we must not stop doing lightweighting, reduction, recycling, all these good things. All of you, everyone in this audience knows all the right things to do. Simply, we don't all do them. But more than that, we, in my opinion, we need to empower the consumers by educating, equipping, and making sure that they are empowered is certainly our next generation, because that will be able to counteract things like COVID-19. And who knows what else lies ahead of us between now and 2050. And so everything that I'm going to be discussing today will have an impact on aspects of COVID-19. So how well do you guys all know your customers? What are your customers' needs? What do they require? And are you meeting those requirements? It's not what you want to sell them, it's what do they need from you. And if one looks at the screen, every single one of those in the supply chain is a customer. The customer is not only the person that goes into the retail outlet to buy food or whatever the case might be, but in that supply chain, we have numerous customers, and each one we need to satisfy, because some of us are somewhere in that chain. If I take just the coal supply chain, for example, which is often something overlooked, you will notice there in that band, in the graph below, you will see that there are times that the temperature goes out of the band that it should remain within. And this causes, if it's food, it could cause damage or destruction of that food. And then it becomes a non-saleable item. And that affects things like food waste, which I'll discuss as well. What about the e-tailer? We know about the retailer, but what about the e-tailer? All of us are now buying online. For some, maybe less than others, but we still are buying online, and we need to understand what the customer needs in that environment, because the middle class is now becoming significant income earners. And are we targeting them correctly, even in a COVID-19 scenario? The same with digitalization in retail. Everything, and I mean everything, is moving towards a digitalized retail system. and we need to move with the time. If one looks at the screen now, you will see various vegetables and fruit in various parts of the world. And so those who like bananas, which is a summer grown fruit, in winter, in Europe, you can have it. How? By packaging. So packaging has brought about us being able to eat what we want, when we want it, and where we want it. And only packaging can do that. And we are seeing more and more of this scenario happening, especially in a COVID-19 scenario, when more plastic is required than ever before to protect the product across our globe. So what are the trends that are affecting the industry at the moment? And this is global. We are sitting at now just shy of 7.8 million population in the world. And this is a shock to some of us. But are we preparing the packaging to be able to withstand that population growth? Are we having the correct packaging to contend with a COVID-19 situation? If one looks at a little bit of history, you will see that the population started growing at around about 1950. And I'd love to see all the faces of you, and if I ask the question, what brought that about? What was the influencing factor of that population sudden surge upwards? An array of answers. The simple answer is discovery of oil. Now we know that oil has been around for a long time. I know you're shouting at me right now, but hold on. When it became an item that was really commercialized and being used in a packaging sense, that was around about 1945, 1950. And this had an impact, indirectly and directly, on the population. And we had a growth in the literacy across the world. And more than that, this has increased the purchasing power. If you look at all the yellow areas there, that is those where the purchasing power has really increased significantly. And we need to prepare our packaging for this. Let us not neglect Africa, because there is a huge growth market waiting to happen. We're having more health conscious people, and is packaging doing something about that? In certain areas, the answer is yes. What about COVID-19? And I'll come to that in a moment, because this is the challenge that's affecting our industry right now. We have globalization. Now, some of you will, and I'm sure there will be a question on this, about what about deglobalization? Now, yes, I can talk ad nausea about deglobalization, but it's a very subjective thing to some degree. So I don't want to harp on the deglobalization aspects of where that is happening around the world. Some of you know where it's happening, and I think I could open a hornet's nest there. But yes, globalization is a challenge for us, as is the reduction in packaging waste. And this is where we are doing an enormous amount of work right now about this. Because that scene that you are seeing there, many of you around the world have seen a very similar scene. And we need to do something about it. Not me only, not the WPO, but all of us, every single one of us in our backyard. At the moment, only 40% of plastic produced is packaging. Only 40%. So this is something that one needs to bear in mind, especially when one looks at this particular statistic. Now, when I say 18 billion pounds of plastic, it's very difficult to understand or comprehend the magnitude of that. But what I can tell you is that 5 grocery bags of plastic trash is sitting on every foot of coastline. And for those metric people, That's about 300 millimeters. 5 corrosive bags on every piece of coastline across the world. I mean, this is like really, really significant. We need to do something about it. And then this is a sad one. Only a fifth of all plastic is recycled globally. And you can read below there some additional statistics. 1/5, 20% of all plastic. And that's why we're having scenarios where the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is getting larger. And we in the WPO are working very closely with the United Nations through their UNIDO arm based out of Vienna, and we meet regularly with them and targeting packaging waste across the world, more so in the developing countries. Food waste is another issue that is directly related and linked to this, and it is certainly a focal point of the WPO, and we have food waste programs going across the world. And this is something that we can talk about as a separate issue quite easily. And we will be addressing this in the coming series in the next 4 months. The increase in the working woman across the world. Now, in many countries, women have worked for many, many years. But in some countries, it's a new phenomenon. And this is having an impact. In many cases, it's a positive impact. But we need to be aware of it so we can adjust our lifestyles, adjust our infrastructure, and adjust our industry to cope with that. The same with the life expectancy. Folk are growing older because of various reasons, and again, discuss that at length, but the life expectancy is increasing, and this is having an impact globally, and it's related to packaging, as you can see in the photograph. And then the retail sector. More and more big retail outlets are happening across the world that were not there 10, 15, 20 years ago. Have a look at Dubai, and I'm just singling out one country. 20 years ago, very different was that particular country. So the next is, what about the innovative process technology? Here we are finding a scenario where there is more innovative technology coming about in the processing world. And yes, there are good things about it. And are we harnessing those particular aspects to the benefit of our industry? And the changing consumer behavior. If one looks at the two bottom photos, you can clearly see that fruit and veggies are packed, not the open market. More and more is packed. And in a COVID-19 scenario, this is happening more than ever before. They are demanding, consumers are demanding that fruit and veggies are packed right across the world. I am meeting weekly with my counterparts across the globe, and this is the information coming in from all over the world into the WPO. Directly, COVID-19 environment, what about it? Lots has been discussed about this. And what we are finding across the world is there are more of the home deliveries happening, which has a direct impact on packaging. And all the goods has to be packed. So more plastics being used than ever before. And that's going to have a direct impact on our environment. That is why we need to empower, educate our future generations and equip them correctly. What about the issues? What issues are affecting us? Counterfeit, big one. By 2023, 9.4 billion it'll cost the industry to have counterfeit packaging. You know, the more and more that I travel across the world, certainly not during COVID-19, sure, but packaging gets a lot of bad publicity, unfairly, in my opinion, because we are part of the solution. Packaging is part of the solution, not the problem. It's the individual that is discarding incorrectly. and that's having an impact on our environment. Let's have a look at some of the opportunities. And sustainability is a big one. And I must admit, more and more countries are coming on board correctly and suitably and getting involved and meeting the requirements that they've set in those particular countries, like the EU, for example. And as we use our resources, we will change that curve that I showed you about the 3 Earths and bring it back to 1 Earth by 2050. And an easy one is smaller packs, because in many cases we waste. By having larger packs, we waste a lot of food. So why not have more smaller packs? Yes, the industry will continue to reduce production costs. And this is a big one. And the impact is directly, or can be directly related to packaging as well. And so there's a lot of good work being done in this particular area. And when one sees this particular photo in front of us, you can see that the demand of a grocery store is significant. How do you compete in an environment like that with a new product? But we need to be objective about this. We need the point of difference. Now, this is a very interesting information released by Peter Smithers last year in April. And that is that India, China, and Indonesia will account for 74.2% of all new sales by 2023. So this is where we need to target our emphasis on whatever we do. And certainly the WPO is doing just that, targeting in those particular areas. We're having one-on-one meetings at the moment, and have been since April, with the Indonesians to try and kickstart an effective and recycling program across the country. And we are very positive that this will come about. But it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes money. So the opportunities remain in education. Education is key. Education in the industry, because they need to be educated. We need to equip them and empower them, because they are the future generation. Be that whatever industry. This one is in pharmaceutical. But in addition, at a tertiary level, we must educate them in packaging as well. And also in secondary, one-on-one, and also through media like we're doing at the moment, where we empower those young students. This is grade 7. And in no time, they will be out in the big wide world. And we need their help in the years to come to meet that target of 2050, where we only have 1 Earth. And what about primary? Even those little ones, this is grade 1. We need to educate them as well to ensure that they too understand that in a COVID-19 scenario, we are educated, we are correctly equipped, and we are empowered to take on these various challenges that face us in the industry into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pierre, for that interesting and very sort of comprehensive overview of where we find ourselves right now, and the sort of effects that you mentioned, some of the effects that COVID is having on the industry. What I'd like to do now is obviously ask our attendees to submit questions using the question and answer function on the system. And as I said before, if you could just state your name and the country that you're from, and then we'll get around to taking as many of the questions as we have. There's a couple of people have asked on the chat already as to whether the slides and the presentation will be available afterwards. I can guarantee that that is the case. We will be we are recording these webinars and we'll be making them available on the ProPak YouTube channel. So a link to that will be forthcoming. Just whilst we wait for some questions to come through, Pierre, if I could just sort of follow up on a couple of things that you mentioned. I know you said you could go on all day about the impacts of globalization, but maybe given the sort of COVID scenario and pandemics having on all of us, if you could just sort of give us your thoughts on that. What in your opinion are the sort of long-term implications of globalization? Will it continue its rampant direction across the globe, or do you see more sort of localization and a trend to getting more sort of local with community-based projects and companies growing as a result of this?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. You know, what we're finding across the world, and when I say across the world, I'm referring to the countries that I interface with all the time. So there are something like directly 60 countries, indirectly probably about 100, 110, 120 countries. And what we're finding is that in the short term, folk have gone to local. But we do know that that's not possible in the long term. But we were desperate during the COVID, in the high period of COVID, and so immediately we try to revert to a local scenario. And that worked for a short period, but globalization in our type of environment, we will not change certainly not in my lifetime. Deglobalization is affecting us, some countries more than others. What do I mean by deglobalization? Well, I'm gathering that all of you understand what globalization is, and this is this interaction, cross-pollination, export, imports between countries, and the sharing of knowledge, because that leads to a better outcome in the long term. However, with deglobalization, we're finding certain countries, and I prefer not to mention countries here. I think it's not necessary. You all know what I'm referring to. And when I say that some countries are not seeing eye to eye with other countries. And so where there was a mutual understanding and mutual trade contracts, they have sort of fallen over between certain countries around the world. And this has an impact on globalization, causing what they call deglobalization. So how does this impact on the COVID-19 scenario? Well, it has, and we saw it during the months sort of leading into March, April, May, where that had a direct impact on certain protective gear and protective clothing, for example, where those items were not coming through. We also saw it in some of the food items. The same scenario was happening in the meat industry, for example. And so that had a direct impact. All of a sudden, we had countries where were lacking in certain foodstuffs. So in the long term, come back to your question, globalization will still dominate. And that is the opinion of all the folk that I'm talking and that I'm interfacing with continuously.
Right, thank you, Pierre. I mean, one of the things you touched on there, and I know it's one of the subjects for one of our later webinars, is the whole issue of supply chains, and the two things are interrelated in terms of the dominance of certain countries becoming sort of suppliers of certain products globally. And now, given the pandemic, and given the for example, the example that you mentioned about PPE, I know certain countries are looking to have sort of supply chains more closer to home. So this is something that, of course, we're going to discuss in more depth later on. But I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that right now.
Yeah, you know, and that's hence why I put those two slides in there on the supply chain. Every single slide in this presentation can be brought into COVID-19. In the supply chain scenario, very evident that the fluctuation part in the cold supply chain, having direct input from that organization, that had an impact on food wastage. So food was not getting through to those countries in dire need. Although all the food was arriving, but it was damaged in some other way. So the supply chains are paramount in our industry, and we all know that. So it's the supply chains are as important as those who design packaging. It's not we design packaging and then we just hope it arrives at the consumer. Not at all. We need to look at each of those customers. And remember, right in the early part of my presentation, I mentioned that are we satisfying our customer? Because each of those customers has a bearing on a pandemic scenario, which is exactly what we found during this pandemic. And so we need to focus. And those countries that are sort of coming out of the pandemic now, and there are a couple of countries around the world, they need to ensure that they do things better. We don't know what lies around the corner. We don't know how long this COVID-19 will carry on for. We don't know whether there'll be some other pandemic in our lifetime. The last pandemic we know was 100 years ago. Will that be the case again? We simply don't know, but we need to get our ducks in a row in case of that scenario happening. And supply chain is very, very important aspect of it.
Yeah, thank you. As I say, this is obviously one of the subjects for our future webinars in the series. And just to let people know, the future seminars, when they do take place, will be panel discussions with multiple presentations from key industry contributors. We're getting some questions coming in through now. There are a couple of themes coming through. Lisa from Sydney and Daryl from Mitsui Chemicals, for example, are asking similar questions with relation to sustainability and whether you feel now that because of the pandemic, sustainability and recycling has taken a back seat as the world confronts more imminent challenges in relation to its food systems and food delivery.
Yeah, thank you for that question, because it's very, very apt in this scenario. And there have been incidents of that happening. And right now there's more of it happening. We're having an increase in home delivery, so an increase in the packaging, and I reflected on that in the presentation. Along with that, we also have a scenario where, and I'll take just one example, there are a number of examples. In some countries, you call it a keep cup. In other words, you take your cup to the coffee outlet and you hand your cup over and they fill it up with coffee. Now that in many, many countries has been discontinued. And so the increase of paper cups is back in place again, which is something that we were trying to drive away from. But there is good news, because now we have fully recyclable cups available. We just need to ensure that those recyclable cups are moved around the world correctly and that more countries are using them, because we cannot have those cups that are not recyclable anymore. So that's one area. Another area that some countries told me that they were focusing on potentially discontinuing folk bringing their own bags to the grocery store, because that, like the keep cups, could contaminate something there, like the coffee machine, and the bags coming from a home that has potentially COVID-19, you're bringing it into a public space. So there could be these scenarios that would affect the sustainability aspect. Sustainability as you see it, as you in your mind think sustainability. But remember what I said in the presentation. We, all of us, you and I, all of us need to do things differently. And that's why I focus on equipping, empowering, and educating our future generation. because we can use a lot of recycled stuff, a recycled plastic. And as long as when we finish taking the contents out, we place that particular packaging material in a receptacle that goes back to the recycling house. And that's what's not happening. So it's easily saying, well, you know, sustainability is messed up. No, it's not. No. We need to get our own minds right. And when our minds are right, we can easily contend with a COVID-19 scenario where more packaging is being used because we need to recycle more. You saw the statistic in the presentation. Only 20% of plastic currently is being recycled. You saw the opening slide of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, 3 times the size of France. These are shocks to the system, and I put them in there on purpose to shock the audience into reality, to fix your own recycling system in your own home.
Yeah, and a sort of follow-up question to that is, we've received a question from Lindy at PK in Australia, asking you to tell us a bit more about the switch in consumer sentiment towards packaging as a result of the pandemic. Have there been any indications that consumers are thinking differently about packaging, or different types of packaging are they moving towards? Can you sort of give your views on that?
Yeah, and thank you for PKN. I did reflect in the PKN magazine a similar question that was posed to me on this particular one. And, you know, packaging is being viewed very acutely, more so now than ever before, because you may recall when I mentioned that more items are home delivered now than we had before COVID-19. And so more packaging is being used. And can the recycling facilities cope with this increase? Well, I think the recycling houses can cope. We just need to make sure that we put the packaging in there so that they can recycle more. But we are using more plastic. Those statistics are not out yet. They'll be out fairly soon. But what the countries around the world are telling me, there has been an increase in the demand on plastic material, predominantly for food items, and more acutely vegetable and fruit. So yes, there's a focus on packaging in this COVID-19 period, and that will continue. But what we are finding is that, and this is really interesting, that some of the countries are telling me that there has been a drop in the food waste, and that is really good news, because there's more focus. Folks spend more time at home. There's more time involved in the household. In fact, there's more interaction between your neighborhood than ever before, because people are spending more time at home. And so folk are using whatever they can regarding food to reduce the amount of times that they have to go out to the grocery store. Wastage is being reduced, which is fantastic. Along with that, so that the figures are not out, we're finding more focus from consumers in ensuring that the material is being placed in the right receptacles for recycling, more so now in the COVID-19 period than what we had prior to, say, January this year.
Okay, well, that's, I mean, it's there is, you know,
the quick answer is than ever before.
Right. Yeah, it's encouraging to see that the consumers are becoming more aware of what you know, of what they are consuming. Maybe it's because, you know, perhaps we have more time to as consumers, we have more time to reflect, or our purchasing habits are changing, as you say, with home deliveries and also, you know, as you say, also with plastics, and particularly with food, you know, because of people are afraid of picking up viruses or whatever, so they're preferring food that is wrapped in plastic rather than buying fresh. So it is interesting, and it'll be interesting to see how that develops and how that continues going forward. We've had a couple of questions in a similar vein, from Veronica in Switzerland, and one from Keith Chessel. Unfortunately, I don't know where you're from. If I could encourage you to just put your countries and your company names, it would be good to get us a feel of where we're receiving these questions from. Actually, sorry, let me answer this one. Veronica was asking, sorry, this one is more focused on us. She's asking what gateways are the most efficient to introduce emerging sustainable solutions to the global and especially Asian markets, especially now with major trade shows postponed and cancelled. So I don't know if you've got something to say on that, Pierre, but certainly from our perspective as exhibition organisers, yes, the major shows have all been postponed, but as I said, particularly in China now, in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam and in Thailand, things are opening up. Regulations have been put in place to hold events again. We're hopeful that in the fourth quarter, from September onwards, we will be able to run some of our trade shows. So those opportunities will still be there, albeit in a slightly different format. In that we need to put in biosecurity measures, we need to put in social distancing measures, and run these events as more controlled events. Coupled with that, we are rolling out a number of digital options so that we can facilitate the interaction between our suppliers and buyers in those developing markets, because of course business doesn't stop, and those contacts and those opportunities need to be explored. And so we've got a number of digital offerings which will become available quite shortly. And there's also talk about running some hybrid events. So when events do start up, if people can't get there physically, then there will be sort of opportunities to run sort of a digital version of the event or some kind of digital connectivity at the same time. So it'll be a sort of hybrid digital and live event. What do you think about that, Pierre, in terms of new companies coming into markets, particularly emerging markets in ASEAN or Asia, as you pointed out in your screen? That's one of the places you mentioned: India, China, Indonesia, Southeast Asia as being the big markets of the future.
Yeah, those are statistics that Smithers Peter came up with, and certainly the WPO, we targeting those areas in relation to ensuring that we get the empowering, the equipping, and the education correct, because that's 74% of the future in relation to new launches in the retail sector. But at the same time, you were correct. I agree with what you said there, Marek, that there will be more digital interface, like this forum, for example. We still do not know how long COVID-19 will go on for. The Spanish flu went on for 3 years, 100 years ago. There is nothing showing us at this stage, from the statistics that I'm seeing, that we can be sure that this will all come to an end at the end of this year. And so we need to prepare ourselves. And that is really where I focused the presentation, was we need to prepare ourselves for these sort of situations moving into next year. There is still lots and lots of research being done around the world, even in this COVID-19 period. And from that will cascade into industry. So yes, there'll be new launches, but how are those new launches going to come into being and sharing it with all the folk around the world? And more so than ever before, this will be done from a digital perspective. Marek, have we lost you?
Yeah, it's interesting. As soon as we Can you? Oh yeah. Apologies. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm back. Isn't it interesting? As soon as we start talking about digital, that's where my Wi-Fi decided to give up, and I've got to switch to another route. Which basically, whilst digital options are always a good backup, they can never really. I think this is a perfect example. They can never replace the face-to-face contact and the human-to-human side of doing business. So it's I've been on a number of these calls when just when things get sort of exciting and interesting, the Wi-Fi connection drops out and there's a bit of a slight panic whilst we try and fix things. So anyway, so I mean that's so on the one hand, I agree. I mean, digital is going to play a bigger role for sure. Hopefully the broadband connections will improve as a result of everyone working from home. I think that's the main issue here. It's turning into, it's just coming up to 9 o'clock in the UK, and I think all the home workers are getting online now, which is what happens here. But but yeah, it is an interesting scenario and a developing scenario. We've had another question from Yivan Nakum saying, how challenging is the medical plastics packaging waste management and how to resolve it, especially in developing countries in Africa? So how about futuristic markets for compostable packaging in the compostable packaging field?
Yeah, again, interesting question, a very good question. That particular question will be covered off in one of the series later on, because I know the fellow that will be on the panel and he'd love a question like that. But what I can tell you in the meantime is that more compostable packaging is coming into being than ever before. The problem at the moment is economies of scale. And so a lot of compostable packaging is more expensive. With the net result is it's not happening as much as we would like it to happen in the developing countries. However, in the developed countries, again, you know, a lot of that packaging is contaminated, and hence it presents a problem in the recycling system. But I think also what we are seeing you know, if we're not recycling it, is there something else we can do with it? And there are a couple of countries, one is Singapore, another one is Japan, that is incinerating packaging, but the gases released in the atmosphere are in fact better than the gases that are surrounding that actual exhaust fumes going into the atmosphere. But they're creating energy. And so by creating energy from this packaging, we are not consuming the energy used in our combustible type systems. And so that is a plus, but we have to get it right, like those two countries that I mentioned have done very well. So coming back to the question regarding more in the medical fraternity, I think that it is an area that folk are spending more or looking at more opportunities of ensuring that we do have compostable packaging, but also in relation to ensuring that we can do something from a recyclable with that contaminated material. And it may mean some might be incinerated.
Okay, going or on a slight tangent, but related to this, I think there's an interesting question just coming from Jonathan Wee, who says, will we see regulations changed to allow recycled contents in food contact packaging? COVID-19 poses a great opportunity to reboot packaging regulations. So can you say something a bit more about how you see packaging regulations going forward? And do you has that already? Are governments already looking at that?
Jonathan, the easy answer is yes. In fact, I had a meeting last night with a group based out of Europe, and amongst other things, we spoke about this particular one. And I can tell you that there is a move within the EU to target this particular area. What I cannot tell you is how long it will take. That's unfortunately the scenario. But yes, there is work done on it, there is action, and something will come out of it. Whether that happens this year, that I don't know yet. But at least they're starting to talk. And the more they talk, the quicker the information will come out.
And is this on a on a pan-European level, or is this on an individual country level that you're talking about?
This was an individual country level that are involved directly with EU regulators.
Okay.
Now, remember that we have within our organisation, we have a portfolio that handles just the sustainability aspect. And so they are in direct contact with those EU regulators all the time.
Okay. We've had a question from Ahmed Magali, just asking for a bit more of a bit more content on the relationship between increasing women working and packaging. Where you had a slide there referring to that. Can you just sort of put a bit more information on that?
Yeah, thanks very much for that, because it's very positive. I love it. It's good. That we're seeing more women in the workplace. In certain countries, as I mentioned, we've seen it for many, many years. But more recently, when I say more recently, I'm referring to the last sort of 10, 15 years, where we see more women coming into the workplace, but at a very senior level, and that's the emphasis. And that is encouraging. That bringing another element to the workspace. But obviously it has impacts, being on the home environment, but you have double incomes now, so your middle class have an increase in their earnings, more money is spent, therefore more packaging is required. So there is an impact. Remember that and that's why I showed you the slide on the population, 7.8 million. Billion, 7.8 billion. And the reason for me showing you that slide is that the amount of packaging in the world is 100% directly related to population. That's the only thing that drives packaging. More population, more packaging. And therefore, we need to get ourselves in order to meet those requirements. We need to understand that the population is increasing. But you saw what I said about Mr. Gandhi and the need and the greed, and therefore, we at all times bear in mind that this population is growing all the time, and we need to ensure that as we're having more disposable income, that has an impact on the packaging demand. And are we getting our house in order to foresee those situations like COVID-19? More packaging came about in COVID-19.
Yeah. I'm conscious now that we've got about 5 minutes left. I want to keep this to the hour that was prescribed. But just before we finish, there's a couple of questions I'd like to just to give you. One's from Alexa in the Philippines, who has asked about how do you see recycled packaging being used in the cosmetics industry? Is there a role for recycled packaging in that sector, do you feel?
The cosmetic industry has always been unique. I've been in this industry over 30 years, 37 years, and they have always been a unique area of the packaging world. They still use the same materials as we use elsewhere, but their finished product is very much different. And the demand placed on that industry is so much higher than in many of the other industries. And we place those demands on the course. There's definitely a trend away from glass into some of the more high-end polymers, which is valuable, because yes, it has an impact on the plastic side, but all of those are recyclable. And again, I remind you that they need to go back into the recyclement to be able to be recycled. I think there's also a scenario where in certain parts of the world, they probably slower in coming on board in relation to the recycling concept. But again, it's up to the individual, up to us as consumers to ensure that that happens. There's nothing, let me not say there's nothing, to a lesser degree in that sector, there are items that are not recyclable, especially when various coatings are put onto these, some of the materials being used in the cosmetic industry. So I think into the future, we need to drive harder in that area to ensure that they also become part of the sustainable world. But let me not lose sight, there are some particular cosmetic houses that are doing it very, very well.
Right. So there's definitely room for improvement and an area that we should keep a focus on going forward, because as you say, the cosmetics industry is a massive player and can do a lot for the good of the planet as well as everything else. One final question to you, Pierre, and this comes from Prathan, who is a student in the University of Mumbai in India, who wants to ask how, as a passionate packaging engineer, how can he get involved in changing the globalization of the packaging industry? And does the WPO provide any internships or volunteering opportunities that can prove to be an asset for the global packaging industry?
Well, I certainly like to hear that passion. I hear passion coming through in that question, which I love. The more passionate people we have in packaging, the better. So thank you. Yes, you know, India is a very vibrant country, very involved in the World Packaging Organization. And what I would suggest that the gentleman does is to go online, go on the WPO website, and you will see there the member organizations in India, and get in contact with them, and put your case to them that you want to become more involved, to do something different and do something for your environment. And sustainability was one of the areas you mentioned, because it's folk like yourself that make the difference, empowering, equipping, and educating. So you've hit the nail on the head, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. So it's a great way to end this series today. So not the series, this particular webinar today as part of the series. And that is, get in touch. If you have any issues, you're welcome to contact me directly, and my contact details are on the WPO website as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Pierre. Thank you for your presentation, which was very enlightening and obviously thought-provoking, because we've got more questions than we've actually managed to get through. So that's very encouraging for us going forward. And it's obviously great to be able to provide this platform for interaction between interested parties in the sector. So once again, thank you very much, Pierre, for all your support and for your contributions today, and also for the helping us with the agenda going forward. Thank you also very much to the audience for attending. We've had great numbers, and we've had, as I say, from a membership and an audience from over 50 countries, which is fantastic for the first one. I would just like to reiterate, if anyone wants a copy or wants to share this presentation or share this webinar with colleagues or to see Pierre's slides, we will be sharing a link to the webinar and going forward to all the future webinars and they will be available on the ProPak YouTube channel. So we will be sending out emails with that if you don't already know where that is. So once again, thank you very much, Pierre, for your contribution. All that now remains for me to say is to advise you that the second webinar in the ProPak series, which is looking at the role of packaging in regard to food safety and food integrity, which, as we've touched upon today, is a subject that under the current circumstances is ever more forefront of people's minds and the industry's minds. This will take place on the 22nd of July in the same time slot as today, and will feature a panel of 4 international contributors. So be sure to tune in and to attend the next webinar. Again, information will be available from the ProPak team and also from the WPO. So we thank you very much again, and we look forward to seeing you on the 22nd of July. In the meantime, please stay safe, and thank you, and goodbye.